Hey people, you found the HillBilly Voodoo channel. Can you guess what we're going to build with these? Woohoo! Yeah! Well, if you guys thought that I was building a monster truck or a mega truck, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I know exactly what would happen if I built something that was high horsepower and ripped around and made lots of noise. The second it was done, my wife would be in it and wrapping donuts on the neighbor's lawn and running over his Corvette and his robot lawnmower. And that probably wouldn't go over so well. So we're going to build the ultimate ATV. I'll have to keep her away from that because I'm pretty sure she'll be wrapping donuts in that on the neighbor's lawn too. So I'm going to go with the two big tires that we have. Or sorry, the four big tires that we have. We'll build ourselves a frame, kind of like that. Kind of looks like Batman and a homeless dude got together and built a monster truck out of a dumpster. Very similar, I think, in style to the Sherp or the Fat Truck or one of those other crazy Russian-built ATVs. The plan is, like all the other builds that we have, to use what we have in the yard here, the ground obtainium, not spend any or very, very little money on it. We're not going to be going high horsepower. If that's what you guys want, then you'll have to go find some other crazy hillbilly. But the way I'm looking at it is this is going to be a vehicle that will be used for off-roading in bug-out type situations where, hey, you're not going to be flying across the desert at 1,000,000 miles an hour in your V8 supercharged hot rod for very long if there's no fuel out there, right? So some type of motor that's super fuel efficient and that will keep it going. And I think the first try, we're going to go with a really, really off the wall type of drive mechanism that you guys may not be aware of, but I've used it in the past on heavy equipment that we use for pulling logs out of the bush, or a forwarder, if anybody knows what that is. It's called a Robson drive, where your wheels are not driven, they're static. They spin, just there's nothing driving the wheel itself. There is another wheel in between that is driven. That driven wheel clogs into the tires, spins the tires themselves. What benefit that is you're only creating the torque that's on the smaller wheel to drive the bigger wheels. You're not having massive amounts of torque on a small axle to spin all that big, huge circumference of the big tires. You're just driving this small tire here. We're going to try this out. I have used it, like I said before, on forwarders that I've built, and it seemed to work very, very well in the bush and worked for a very long time. So that's kind of the idea that we're going to go with. You guys got any comments or any suggestions, let me know. And like I said, it's going to be built out of ground obtainium, the junk that we have in the piles on the ground around here. I'm pretty sure that we have enough to get most of this started. And I don't know how far we'll get right away, but it'll get done. Now the parameters that we have to stay in are, it has to be 8 feet wide or under. So that's like less than 8 feet. The legal limit around here without permits to be on the road is 8 foot. So that's what we're going with this. It's got to be under 8 feet. Can't be over. Tires are 2 feet wide. So that's taking up 4 feet of that 8 feet right there. So the inside of the vehicle is going to be fairly tight and narrow. I want to keep the bumper length from the front to the back around 10 feet. So we'll go 10 feet there. So that's going to make this vehicle, its footprint is more or less going to be a square box. It's from here to here is about 8 feet, and square wise it'll be about 8 feet too. So it's going to be look like a brick, I guess, but that's kind of the way I want. With this Robson drive, we are going to use skid steering. First off, we're going to use a differential steer type steering. Keep it really simple. If the differential steering doesn't work, then we'll go to a clutched differential steering. But hopefully the differential steering will work. I've had really good luck with that so far. And the other parameter is, like I say, small engine, low horsepower. Smaller the engine, the lower the horsepower, the less likely you are to snap stuff and break stuff. It won't be going much faster than, I would say, no suspension, big tires like that. If you hit probably 20 miles an hour on hard surface with a skid steer, that's pretty sketchy. Like, I've driven a skidder down the road on the pavement, and once they start bouncing, they don't stop bouncing. You gotta stop the machine, otherwise it'll bounce right off the road. So I think we're not gonna be going much faster than maybe 15 miles an hour, whatever that is in kilometers, just a little bit, 30 kilometers, somewhere in there. And it's gotta be built out of junk that we have. So let's go see what we can find to start building a frame out of, because I think that's the first step, is to get the frame. So I'm sitting here looking at my picture, guys, and I just realized something really weird. That friggin' Elon Musk is Batman. Yeah, he's been fooling us the whole time. His Cybertruck is really the Batmobile. Well, let's go outside and see what we can find to build a frame out of. So out here in my piles of ground obtainium, we have what's left of the deck off of my old toy hauler. Been cutting chunks off of this thing for quite a few years now, and there's pretty much just the main frame rails left, so thinking that square tubing would be good. That'll be a good start to our frame. So I'm going to drag this down closer to the shop where we have power and a hose in case the sparks decide to catch something on fire. And I'm going to cut this thing up. Measure this off at 10 feet because that's the length that we want our frame. Mark it and then chop it off. Take it in the shop and see what we can make out of it. Well, I harvested our 10-foot chunk of frame there from that deck, drug it into the shop here. I have it up on sawhorses and I have leveled it out. both that way and that way. So give us a good platform to start building on. To chop another chunk out of that deck to weld in the back here. From the outside to the outside, it's 34 inches, if I remember. Pretty sure it's 34 inches. Let's measure here again. Yep, 34 inches. So that should give us enough width that with a 2-foot tire on each side and a little bit of offset, it will keep us still under 8 feet. The inside of the cab will be 34 inches wide, which is not really all that wide, but if you think about it, those K trucks, which we have one parked out there, they're only 4 feet wide to the outside of the body. So I don't know if we'll be able to fit 2 of me side by side in this thing, but I should have enough room. So let's weld that piece in there. Make sure that this frame is all square when we do it, which right now I'm within a 1/16 of an inch over 10 feet. So that's probably good enough for what I'm building anyway. So I'll zap this thing in here and then we'll decide where we're gonna go from there. Well, it's the next day and we got this piece welded into our frame here. I managed to weld it in a way that when the metal shrunk, it pulled my frame right back into almost perfect. It's enough that it looks exactly the same on the tape measure, so that's probably good enough for now. I'm sure it will move its way out of alignment the more crap that gets welded onto it, but it's pretty much perfect right now. My welds aren't always the exact beautiness, but then again, I use straight CO2 for my gas, my shielding gas. It's not a MIG mix of any type, it's just straight CO2. So they ain't pretty, but damn are they strong. 30 years I've never had a weld crack, so seems to work for me. And a small cylinder of CO2 lasts me twice as long as a large cylinder of MIG mix. So if any of you are out there doing fabricating or welding or playing around with stuff like this, then that's an option for you. CO2 is extremely cheap. Does the job. It's not pretty, but it's better than flux core, and yeah, welds aren't that ugly. If you clean them up with a wire brush, they look almost just like, well, almost just like Blue Shield or whatever other name brand MIG mix you're gonna use. So anyways, enough of that yapping. I think the next order of business is to try to figure out what we're gonna do for axles. Now, I want to use trailer axles because they're a static axle. They don't have any power to them. But I'm not 100% sure whether I have any big trailer axles left out there. So we'll have to go wander around and see what we can find. Now, I've wandered around here for a while, and all the big trailer axles I have are doing trailer axle type things. And all the little trailer axles I have are, well, they're below a 3,500 pound rating, so they're too small to, or too wimpy anyways to use. So I have this old truck. It's pretty much boned out. The rear differential in this thing was blown up, and that's why this truck was taken off the road to begin with. So it's a full floater differential. I haven't counted the bolts or nothing. It's probably a 14 bolt. So I'm thinking we're going to chop this differential out of here and build ourselves an axle out of this. Probably about as beefy could be. And I think that maybe we will chop the front end out of this thing too and use the spindles and build ourselves another trailer axle. It's got disc brakes on it, so we can use the disc brakes for part of our turning. And I don't know, it's pretty crusty, but I'm sure that we can figure something out with this. And if not, well, then we'll have to figure something else out. This truck is kind of yeah, it kind of made me a little irritated last week. Person was supposed to come and get the chrome pieces and stuff off of it, so I drug it out of the bush from way up there for him and pulled it down here. It was about halfway down the hill. Wheels were locked up solid, so I figured I'm safe. I can take the chain off of it. Pulled the chain off. Came down to about the gate there with the excavator. Moved the excavator out of the way, and I was bent down to, well, I was looking at something shiny on the ground, and all of a sudden I get this big wham, and this truck drove right over the top of me. Knocked me down. The duals went across the back of my stomach and my hips, and then it came down here and it smashed into the smart tank. Yeah, broke with the track, pushed all the body and everything forward, and made a hell of a mess of that thing. So it might not be 100% recoverable. It bent the frame and a bunch of other stuff. So this truck is pretty much, well, at risk of being YouTube blunderous. It pissed me off, so it's gonna go, and it's gonna go violently. So let's chop that axle out of there and that front end out of there, and then maybe we'll sit here and smash it with the excavator for a while. Take some frustration out on it. Well, it's starting to rain here again, so I probably won't be able to film too much of me chopping this differential out of here, because my camera's not waterproof, and I am. So I'll get this, at least get the U-bolts cut out of this thing, and then maybe if it's not pouring rain, then I'll set you guys up on a tripod here and show you the rest of it. One day I'll figure out how to run an excavator and hold a camera at the same time, but I'm pretty sure today's not that day. So I'm gonna shut this off and concentrate on what I'm doing here. I've dragged this differential down to in front of my shop here and pulled the tires off of it. I can't quite remember the full story on this truck. It's been sitting around here for 20 years, but from what I remember, the differential was apparently blown up, but I don't really know what has happened here. But for some reason, this thing has got a Bluetooth drum. Yeah, the drum is completely separated all the way around, and yeah, that must have been some really catastrophic thing. There was no chunks of that drum inside the wheel or anything, but I don't know what's happened. So the hub still spins around, so that's the only part that we're using anyways, and the tubes. I have to excuse the peanut gallery here, they're enjoying the rain. So what I'm thinking is we're gonna get rid of all the brake drum backing plate, all that assembly. We're going to cut it on either side of the pumpkin, stick it back together, hold those sides back together, weld it back together, and we'll have a super beefy, well, trailer axle. What's going to be good about this is it will be hollow inside, and once I take the axles out, we could possibly build central tire inflation. You can run air or exhaust or something into the axle tube, and it will come out where the axle was, because we're not going to be using the axle, and we can go into our rim with something. That might be an idea. I don't know. It could be an option. But anyways, I'm gonna drain the oil out of this thing, pull the cover off of it, see what the inside actually looks like, and start cutting those tubes off. Once I get the tubes cut off, then I can drag it in the shop in a little bit more manageable chunks and see what it's going to take to put this thing back together in the length that we need. We got our axle tubes all chopped off there now, and I pulled the hubs off and cut all the brackets and all the other stuff that I don't think we're going to need off. And now we're going to have to figure out the length that we need, which I would say from the wheel mounting surface to the frame needs to be about 1 foot. I'll go measure the back spacing on the rims that I have. I'm probably going to have to change that back spacing some, but I figure about 1 foot. Well, no, about 9 inches from the hub mounting surface is somewhere about here, or the wheel mounting surface. So back about 9 inches, 9.5 inches is where it's going to be in line with the frame. So we're obviously going to have to put something in the middle here, lengthen this. And that is some super beefy axle tube. So we'll have to put these in the lathe, machine them off, and probably, I don't have any more tube this big. That stuff is huge. So I do have some differential tubing from, or axle, whatever you want to call it, axle tubing, from a Dana 44. So I think we're going to have to put a chunk in between, more or less just to hold this thing straight and apart so that we get the right amount of axle sticking out on either side of the frame, so the tires are not going to whack, and so that it's going to be under 8 feet wide, which is our maximum width. So let's set one of these big, huge, heavy tubes up in the lathe, face it off, and see how much we're going to have to bore out the inside of it to accept that Dana 44 tube, which I believe is quite a bit smaller. I haven't measured it yet, so let's do that right now. Well, I got our axle tube bored out there now to about 65 millimeters. That's what we're going to call it from now, is an axle tube, because I guess that's kind of what it is. Now you can see the difference between a Dana 44 tube and whatever this is. I think it's a 14 bolt. But there's quite a bit of difference there. Same with the thickness of it. So what we're going to do is turn this down to 65 millimeters, because I've bored that out to 65 millimeters. We're going to shove that in there, and then we're going to take the other axle tube that I've got mounted up there in the lathe now, and we're going to bore that out to 65 millimeters, and we're going to shove it onto that end there, and hopefully we can get our proper width of the axle and we can weld it together. No, I'm pretty sure that there's people out there watching this right now and they're questioning, does that guy know what he's doing? Well, I kind of always try to know what I'm doing. It's the whether I'm doing it right or for how long I'm going to continue to do it the way I'm doing it. Because I really don't have any formal training in anything. I just kind of try stuff. Do I know if this contraption that I'm building is going to work? I have no idea. I don't even have a clue if it's going to be what I want it to be when it's done. But that's kind of the way this channel works, guys, is use what you got to make what you want. We got some tube, we got some pieces of square stuff. We're making a frame. We're going to make ourselves a bug out buggy. If you like this kind of content, you should probably subscribe. If you think these videos are kind of neat, well, maybe you should give me a thumbs up. So I'm going to get back onto the boring part of boring of that tube there. I can't really believe how out of round and how bent these tubes were. This one, I started turning the outside of it down, and you can see that, well, it's still, I turned quite a bit off, and it was probably 1/4 of an inch bent like this in a U. That's pretty thick stuff. So yeah, enough of this yapping. I'm gonna go back to work here, keep boring this stuff out. I won't bore you with the boring part. I'll bring you back when we can actually slide these 2 pieces or 3 pieces together and make a real axle tube out of them. Well, I got our 2 axle tubes bored out here, and I got our 3rd chunk of axle tube chewed down. I didn't go like a tight tolerance type fit. I just want it to slide together and kind of hold these tubes where they're supposed to be. So hopefully my measurements are correct, and this is all going to slide together. So that goes like that. And should go in there like that. Now we can measure our distance between here and here, set it up, and weld these in place. So this is just going to hold everything kind of more or less straight. After looking at the way that axle was flopping around there in the lathe, I'm pretty sure we're not going to get it super straight because it's bent like this on both sides, so it is what it is. Before I weld this in here though, I'm kind of liking this idea of central tire inflation. So I think I'm gonna poke a hole in this because I can do it in the drill press, and then we can somehow access air inside this tube. If we don't use it, we don't use it, but at least the hole will be there and we won't have to fumble around later on. So let's take this apart here and let's go poke a hole in it. Well, that's her, guys. Kind of looks like an axle to me. Definitely got some heat in it when we were welding it because she's still smoking away there. And it rolls, well, it rolls pretty straight. So we must have did something right. Yep. So what do you guys think? Is this going to be a fun project or what? I think it will be. At least it'll test some of my skills, maybe learn some new ones. I think I'm going to leave this video here. So until next time, guys, use what you got to make what you want. And I'll see you later.